Welcome to the Practice Brave podcast. I am the host, Brianna Battles, founder of Pregnancy and Postpartum Athleticism and CEO of Everyday Battles. I'm a career strength and conditioning coach, entrepreneur, mom of 2 wild little boys, and a lifelong athlete. I believe that athleticism does not end when motherhood begins, and this podcast is dedicated to coaching you by providing meaningful conversations, insights, and interview topics related to fitness, mindset, parenting, and of course, all the nuances of pregnancy and postpartum. From expert interviews to engaging conversations and reflections, this podcast is your trustworthy, relatable resource for learning how to practice brave through every season in your life. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Practice Brave podcast. And today we have Joelle Cavagnaro here, and we're going to be talking all about nutrition and fitness, and just, she's been in the game for a long time. And I really appreciate her no nonsense take on navigating the fitness industry, especially for female athletes and moms and business owners. So there's, I think, a lot of parallels that she's going to be able to provide for this audience that you all will really appreciate. So Joelle, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So give us a little bit of a background on what you do and just where it all started for you.
Yeah, sure. So without getting too much into the weeds, I will say I was a pretty active child involved in sport. Grew up watching my dad compete in bodybuilding. Like my parents were gym goers. I was definitely raised in that setting. I was in gym childcare, while my parents went and got their workouts on. And so the gym space and exercise was not entirely new to me, but I was mostly involved in sport until I went away to college. And up until then, I was one of those kids who could eat whatever they want and not gain weight kind of thing, right? And then I went to college and I stopped having that same level of activity, but kept the same previous eating habits. And I gained about 30 pounds my freshman year of college. And that was actually what sparked my health and fitness journey from the get-go. Due to, and I know that you and I will talk more about this, but due to the misinformation at the time, and just to kind of give people a little bit of timeline here, I'm talking about 2011, 2012 is around when I was a freshman, sophomore in college, starting to take my health and fitness more seriously, going to my school's weight room, things like that. And the best way that I could just wrap this all up for you is that the pendulum swung really hard from weight gain into weight loss. And this was when Instagram was just starting to get a little bit more popular. Pinterest was really, really popular, of the exercise girls on Pinterest and pinning, the girls with abs up onto your Pinterest boards and all of that. And there was a lot of misinformation circulating around fitness and nutrition, no different that it circulates today, probably even worse now. Misinformation really led me down a pretty dark path that eventually became what I like to call an unintentional eating disorder, where my goal was just originally to lose this weight and to be lean and look like a bodybuilder. And at the time, no one was talking about maintenance phases or bulking. It was just, if you want to be healthy, you should be dieting. You should have abs. You should be doing cardio. And so I kind of almost backed myself into a corner and then didn't know how to get out of it. And that was all kind of my freshman year of college. And it really inspired me to learn as much as I possibly could about health, fitness, nutrition. And I happened to be in school at the time for health and phys ed. So I wanted to be a teacher, and I did teach for a while. And I took one undergrad anatomy and physiology class, and my whole class failed it, and I got an A in it. And I was like, oh, I am fascinated by the human body. This is really cool. And then I took an undergrad exercise science class, did great in the class. All the other PE majors failed it. And I was like, okay, I think I'm onto something here. I think I really, really like this stuff. And so I went on to do a master's degree in exercise science, and my master's thesis is in blood flow restriction, and kind of very niche topic. But I, from that point, just kind of made it my mission to learn as much as I possibly could about health and women's health and exercise science, so that I would be able to better decipher, really for my own selfish interests, better decipher myth from fact. And that kind of inspired me to start sharing what I was learning with other people. And it kind of snowballed into what it is now. I did teach high school health and PE for a few years. And I ran a one-on-one coaching business on the side. And that one-on-one coaching business continued to really thrive the more that I shared information and educational posts on Instagram. And I eventually left teaching. And now I am full-time CEO and business owner.
Yeah. So tell me about your current business and what that looks like.
Yeah. So we have a health and fitness coaching company called Levolution Coaching. And we are a team of 16 of us now. And all of our staff ranges from exercise physiologists to registered dietitians, pre and postnatal coaches, menopause specialists, kinesiologists, athletic trainers. So we are really in a unique position because we are able to help such a wide variety of people, whether you're interested in weight loss or you're interested in training for a marathon or you're postpartum or you're pregnant and you need more guidance with your nutrition or your training and a more just kind of custom approach to your health and fitness. That is who we help. And we're in a great position to be able to help a lot of different people because we have kind of a wide array of specialties. So that's kind of where business is at now.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, you've brought in an evidence-based care approach to your staff and just the overall coaching methodology, because, to kind of circle back to what you were saying earlier about the era you came up in, I'd say like that 2010 to 2015, 16 era. Like I'm a little bit older than you. I was having babies in 2013-ish.
Okay, yeah.
And it was just such a freaking toxic time on the internet because social media, we were starting to use it for reasons beyond like Facebook, I guess. And, Instagram was coming around, like you said, Pinterest. And what we were seeing was just like a lot of exercise and nutrition disorders and dysmorphia being presented as what health and fitness was. And that was what was sort of glorified as what to follow along, like whatever was in this magazine, whatever you saw somebody post on this blog. And it was so easy for, I think, a lot of us, even with a background in coaching and exercise phys, to be like, well, God, is that like what you're supposed to be doing? Because so much, and I mean, I don't know what your experience was, but I felt like so much of my undergrad was just like not applicable to real life coaching and real life training. It's like I understood the anatomy and the physiology and the biomechanics, but then when it came to like real
practical application,
it was learning by actually working with clients and being my own client. Yep. That really was the way through. Obviously things have changed, but man, it was just quite the era.
It's funny. I can't tell if social media is worse now with that information or if we've just gotten used to it. But I find that a lot of people who come to us, even for coaching, they're like, I just want someone in my corner who can tell me if what I'm even doing or following makes sense, because I could scroll Instagram and see, hey, you should be working out like this if you're postpartum, or you should be working out like this if you're in menopause. And then I see the next post that says, don't listen to any of that, and then now you have coaches and creators reacting to something someone else said. And like, now it's just this battle of he said, she said, and who do you trust more? So I think it's almost gotten more confusing because now you also have people who seem like an authority figure, either by way of a degree or by way of their following, who have gained trust. And now people are really confused. Like I really do feel for the average consumer who doesn't have a specialty or degree or does not have the ability to read scientific literature or like interpret research, because it's got to be so confusing right now to just be a consumer.
Yeah. And then the research doesn't even always check out. Like we look at the research and we're like, well, that doesn't actually apply to like me, or it's kind of missing the point in a lot of ways. And I say that when people are like
cherry picking data.
Yeah. Or like even just looking at pregnancy and postpartum, they're like, well, yeah, like exercise is safe. You can do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, right. But it's missing the fundamentals that really encompass a holistic approach, which is like core, pelvic health, mental health, and a long-term athletic performance. The research does not reflect that side of what we're looking for. It's not just health and safety of mom and baby. Like, of course, exercise is beneficial. So we're absolutely in research, and that's just looking at the pre and postnatal space. Nevertheless, all the other spaces that influence health, training, nutrition, fitness, whatever it might be, and women's health, like it is. So that makes it really hard to both practice evidence-based, like coaching, but do it in a way that is actually practical because of the experience and the reps that you have personally and with the people that you're working with.
Yeah. Did you also start out with kind of like in-person coaching before you kind of went the online route?
Yeah, I feel like it's super negligent to just jump into, I will always say that on this podcast and on social media, like you cannot be successful online sustainably without the real life
in-person experience. Tactile.
Yeah, because otherwise you're just repeating. Like you're just repeating something that somebody else on the internet said, or something that you were told by a bro trainer, or your strength conditioning coach who was like 50 years old. That like those were great coaches for me, but they weren't great coaches for, say, pregnancy and postpartum information. And that's who I was wanting. Like when I was first pregnant, I was looking at my coaches who were all older than me and had been in the game for a long time, and they didn't know anything. They're like, well, you're fit. You're just going to like birth a badass baby, which like, true. He is a little bit of a badass. They both are. But like, I mean, my God, our bodies go through so much, and there's such a disconnect in what the fitness and health and nutrition industry can do for a lot of people.
Yeah. And there's still so much misinformation around pregnancy and exercise. Even, I even ran into that with my own doctors. My very first pregnancy, I had an OB who I fired like 18 weeks into my pregnancy because he told me I shouldn't be exercising. And I was like, oh, is there something that you're seeing on my sonograms or in my medical notes or in my lab work that is making exercise contraindicated? Well, no, I guess you could exercise, just, no squats or anything like that. I'm like, why can't I squat? And he turned around and he said to me, oh, you're going to be one of my difficult patients, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
And I was like, bye. Time to find a new doctor, because I shouldn't really be more up to speed on the ACOG guidelines than you are, sir.
I know. And the ACOG guidelines are still like, I mean, it's just so basic. Like, it's not even hard to be up to date on that.
Yeah.
We see that. It's so broad.
No, it's so broad. It's broad. It's vague. It's like, it's not all that much different from like the ACSM guidelines.
Right. Which are also like leaves a lot. Yes.
Vague. Yeah. Like 150 minutes of moving your body. Okay.
Cool. Yeah. And like, I think like we've seen a huge cultural shift in how women have participated in exercise over the last even decade. Like how you and I were maybe training back in like 2010 to 2013 is very different than how people were training in the early 2000s or before that. Like, so even we've seen a huge shift in women being in the weight room and that being a lot more normalized versus being one of the few people that were, few women that were lifting. So when people are telling me like, well, I'm not an athlete, I don't coach athletes. And I'm like, right. But like, you don't realize that how you train is actually pretty athletic, especially because all of the pre and postnatal guidelines, and frankly, most of the certifications out there are through the lens of very generic, pretty outdated forms of exercise for how women train today.
Yep. Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. Like we've seen a big shift in just how women know to participate in fitness. Like they're like the girls that are in their early 20s now.
They're strength training.
And like that is athletic. Yet the information, if they have babies in the next 5 to 7 years, like it's still very much through the lens of pretty moderate, basic aerobic 150, whatever. Like it's just, it leaves a lot left.
I think there's this misconception though, that depending on your age or depending on the stage of your life that you're in, that your training needs to be significantly different. How should I be training in my 20s versus my 30s versus my 40s versus menopause? And the reality is, regardless of the age, you should be strength training a few days a week. You should be doing cardio a few days a week. And I know that's vague and that's broad, but it comes down to finding exercise that you enjoy, because what you enjoy is what you can stick with. Finding exercise that you can perform well and recover from, and a piece of recovery is obviously going to be your nutrition and your sleep and things you're doing outside of the gym. But cardio and resistance training, I don't care if you're in menopause, I don't care if you're pregnant, I don't care if you're postpartum, I don't care if you're in your 20s or your 70s. These are the same rules apply, the same big rocks. They're all the same.
Right. And I think we do have to focus on the big rocks, but in these new seasons, people get hyper-focused on the little ones, but the little ones aren't really the things that move the dial the most. And it's so much of it is attached to like the relationship and the adjustments we're willing to make with our body and with our training. Cause so many people are like, well, I have to keep doing what I was doing when I was, if they're in their 50s, they want to do what they were doing at 30. And if they are now pregnant, they want to keep doing what they were doing prior to getting pregnant. And if they're postpartum, they want to keep doing what they were doing even during pregnancy. Yeah. And it's like, we're always looking in the rear view mirror instead of like making a game time adjustment to the body and the season of life that you are in now. Because if you are what I call in pursuit of this lifetime of athleticism, which I think ultimately is the goal, you have to change your approach throughout those seasons while keeping the big rocks, the big rocks.
Yes. That's a really great way to put it. Those big rocks remain the same, but the frequency, the intensity, the duration that you are contributing to either exercise or something else, that stuff is allowed to shift, and it should shift. I do not work out the same way I did pre-kids, not because my training strategy is all that different, but I don't want to be in the gym for 2 hours a day anymore. Like there was a time in my life where I rarely ever took rest days. I wanted to train every day. I was training 2 hours a day. I'd go do 2 hours of lifting and then an hour of cardio like a crazy person. And like, I don't have the time nor the passion at this point to work out for 2-3 hours a day. So I think sometimes women need to hear that A, your goals are allowed to change, B, your priorities are allowed to change, and C, your fitness is allowed to look different than it used to. And it very likely will. I think women feel a lot of pressure to maintain what they were previously doing. And you can do what you were previously doing, but like just a little different version of it.
Exactly. And I don't think people realize like that maybe what you were doing before actually wasn't fully serving you. Like, that's why I tell people like you actually become a better athlete when you are a mom. And it's not because of necessarily like, yes, there are physiological benefits to motherhood. Yes. But I'm talking about like this overall like maturity that happens in your approach to training, the relationship you now see, like, I really need to get my shit together when it comes to how I view my body, my training, my nutrition. Like, I don't want to be that version of myself that was in a lot of ways, like we were toxic and in our approach, in our training, and like how we were training may not be what we would have been recommending to other people. And sometimes it takes this transformation that is motherhood, that is seeing your body change, your lifestyle, your priorities, your time, your capacity, all those things change to reassess how you want to show up in your relationship with this long-term health and fitness.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think that we have to be able to adapt, and that especially when you become a mom, like you're needing to become so much more efficient. Like, first of all, I'm going to the gym at 5 a.m. now because I want to be done and dusted before my kids even wake up, because now I get to start my day and do something else, do something for me before I do everything for everyone else for the rest of the day. But I also I have a friend who's like, you never film your workouts. And I'm like, I am in and out, like just efficiency wise. I want to be in, I want to be out. Like, I'm not there to dilly dally. There was a time in my life where the gym was very much a dilly dally place for me. And I do still very much enjoy like the social aspect of the gym. I work from home and sometimes I don't speak to an adult all day, except for at 5 a.m. at the gym. So I do like the social aspect, but I'm efficient with my workouts. And that has forced me to train a little bit differently and change the intensity of my workouts and the frequency and the duration of my workouts. But it has only benefited me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We get a little bit more efficient. And then like you're in the little kid season of life. I'm a little bit ahead of you. My kids are like just little boys now. And then you start to see it shift again. Like slowly you're like, okay, they're in school a little bit longer. My business is in a different place. My life is a different place. I actually don't want to see how heavy I can lift anymore. I can still lift heavy, but I'm not chasing PRs. I'm not on this crazy structured program. Whereas the 10 years ago version of me was like, I got to be working at 85% of my 1 rep max this week. And if I don't, then I'm not going to hit this lift or whatever. And it's it was just so consuming, and it's really freeing to not be consumed by a really rigid approach to your training.
Yeah. And even your nutrition, I think so much of that carries over with food too. Like, I haven't, for a long time, I tracked macros meticulously and weighed everything that I ate. And I do think absolutely that there is a time and a place for that. But this season of my life, I have no interest in doing that.
Yeah. And let's talk about that a little bit because I think it's really interesting. I will totally tell you, I used to think like, God, if you're tracking, then like that's like neurotic, that's borderline disordered. I used to think that. And then I like also wasn't happy. I kind of went through like the pendulum swing because it went from like not eating anything and being really skinny to then seeing, okay, that was messed up, to then, all right, I'm just going to kind of full send it. I'm going to eat whatever I want, like body positivity. Well, like that's also toxic to an extent too, at least for me it was. And I'm like, well, now I don't like what I look like or how I feel.
Like, where's the middle ground?
Yeah. And then like you add in, for me, it was like my mental health. Like it could have been really shitty when I was really lean, but it was also like kind of shitty when I was like more overweight for my body. I'm like, okay, this is not working. And it wasn't until I decided to start competing in jiu-jitsu that it literally forced me to improve my relationship with the scale and my relationship with macros. And I'd like to share this story kind of repetitively because we've seen that extreme again, this like last 10-year era of all the messaging on social media and like what camp you're in, where this is toxic. Well, this is toxic. This is healthy. This is unhealthy. And you have to find what that actually looks like for you. And for me, that was saying like, okay, I need to get over my own BS and the own narratives that I've created as a coach and as an athlete and even as a mom and say, like, what's going to help me feel really healthy? I couldn't even look at the scale. I had to have my husband look at it, which honestly to me, I'm like, actually, that feels worse. But I couldn't look at the scale. And then finally, like, just got a little bit more comfortable with it. And then it was just became data. And then same with macros. It's like, okay, this isn't telling me I can't eat. It's just giving me information on where I'm like maybe a lot more like nutrient deficient than I thought I was. I thought I was eating a lot of protein or like more fat, but I actually am not. It's super out of ratio. And it was kind of counting macros for a while that absolutely improved my relationship with food and my body and just finding a really healthy homeostasis.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience. And I know to your point and exactly what you said, for some people, tracking macros can be really disordered. If you have a history of an eating disorder, it's not always recommended to track macros. For me, I had kind of the opposite experience where I had so many food fears kind of trying to get through that eating disorder and disordered eating stage of my life with orthorexia, right? This obsession with clean eating and over exercising.
That paleo era and all of that. Yeah, that hit hard. That hit hard in your college and my right out of college era.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And I had so many food fears. And eventually I started working with a coach who was like, let's have you start tracking macros. And that was a new term to me. I had no clue what that meant. And he, went on to explain to me like, look, if you need 2,000 calories a day and you could fit a cookie into that 2,000 calories, you can't gain weight from that. And I was mind blown at the time. Like, wait a minute, you're telling me I can eat a cookie and it won't instantly make me fat. You're telling me this is about calories overall. And that was really, really helpful for me. And so macro tracking became a really, really helpful tool that actually helped me overcome my eating disorder because it allowed me to recognize that I didn't need to fear food.
Yeah. And I remember that almost as like a weird rebuttal. I don't even think it was an intentional rebuttal, but to the paleo and all of those things attached to paleo, like clean eating stuff. And then there was like the if it fits your macros, like group and messaging.
The Pop-Tart.
Yeah. It's like, yes. And it just like, that was, again, a different variation of how confusing it is to navigate. Well, what is actually healthy? Because if it fits my macros, but it's a Pop-Tart, like, is that so toxic? Because paleo over here is telling me it is. And then again, it's teaching women and people in general how to like find the nuance here and what's actually going to work for you, what's sustainable, what moderation looks like, and that you can change your body positively without being neurotic. And sometimes changing your body might mean that you gain weight and you give yourself a lot more flexibility, go into maintenance, you go into just trying to gain a little bit. But sometimes it's also like losing, and that's okay too. It doesn't have to be like, I guess we just still see that. And that was like the previous iteration of it.
I think what's so interesting today is that, look, people love extremes. People love flashy. Flashy is what gets clicks. It's what gets good engagement. And you and I both have never been dogmatic, at least in this day and age, maybe when we were younger, but dogmatic in our approaches to health and fitness. And you said a really, really important word, which was nuance. There is nuance to macro tracking, to whatever type of diet, to like food dyes are a big topic of conversation right now. Like none of those are black and white topics. There's nuance. There's a lot of nuance and context involved in those conversations. And I think, quite frankly, the coaches or creators who are, quote, doing it right are the people who are sharing, hey, nuance matters, context matters. This is not black and white. We can't make a blanket statement. We can't speak in absolutes. Because for some people, macro tracking might be a great fit. And for other people, it might not be. And that goes with any trend or thing that you could think of when it comes to the health and fitness space. So I think people just keeping in mind that nuance matters and context is really important. For the person who struggles with food fears, they don't need to go online and hear that if they have a cookie, it's going to be the death of them. And there are other people who need to hear, hey, I probably am eating too many cookies and I need a little bit less. Like it depends. It depends on the person and the phase of life that they're in.
Yes, I 100% agree. And this is a pretty good segue into our next, maybe slightly controversial aspect of a conversation here. But I think what we're seeing right now is this hyper fixation on food dyes and seed oils and sort of like, again, the little rocks in comparison to the big rocks. Something I try to tell my clients all the time is like, choose your toxic, right? Choose the thing that maybe you don't want a lot of that, but then if you're going to be like freaking out over the ingredients in your makeup or in your food or whatever, but at the same time drinking alcohol every single week, like, okay, we just have to understand that there might be a little bit of like contradictory understanding of what is healthy, what is actually toxic, what does that even mean, and how to like sort of sort out a lot of the messaging that we hear, especially, and this is what I want to talk to you about, in the mom space with what we are feeding our kids. And so like what we are not just us consuming as grown adults, but then a lot of the really confusing and honestly like pretty messed up opinions out there guiding moms and like a lot of shaming messaging.
Yeah, I'll be very honest with you, Brianna. So one of the biggest things that bothers me about the food dye crusade, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, we're candid here, girl.
Is that I feel as though moms were targeted by this conversation. And because every mom wants to do right by their kid, every mom wants to make sure that their kid is healthy. And moms are really, really vulnerable when it comes to challenging if they're doing right by their children. And so I kind of hate that moms became like I don't know if I would say like the leaders of the crusade, but I just feel like moms were targeted in this conversation. And it's something that really bothers me. I can completely get down with the message of people wanting nutrient density in our foods and people wanting better ingredients and higher quality ingredients in our foods. But again, this is a conversation that I believe is very, very nuanced. I don't think it's as simple as dyes are bad, get them out of our food. And I've talked about this on a few podcasts and I've talked about it on social media, but I think there's so many different levels to it. One of the arguments is not everyone can afford to just have less ultra processed food. First of all, let's just cover this. If you don't consume a lot of ultra processed food, you're not really going to consume a lot of dye in the first place. So what's interesting to me is that like Fruit Loops, for instance, became like the plastered food, right? Of food dye. Well, no one's eating Fruit Loops because they're healthy, first and foremost. So now we have like this health movement of wanting to get the dye out of Fruit Loops as if that is going to change anything about the health of the individual who's eating the Fruit Loops. And then people like to come back with, well, obesity rates are higher than ever and chronic disease rates are higher than ever. And that is all true. But we have to come back to the big rocks. We are averaging like less than 2,000 steps per day as the average American. We're averaging less than 1 serving of fruits and vegetables per day as an American. We're averaging almost 0 minutes of physical activity per day as an American. We're averaging 3 to 4 hours of TV time per day as an American. And we're talking about food dyes. Like we're talking about the dye in Fruit Loops. Like you got to start with the big rocks. And like you said, choose your toxic. And so I don't think that it's not worth having a conversation about. I just don't think it's the hill to die on if we're trying to improve health overall.
Right. And I think you made a really great point that like moms, we want to do right by our children. And I mean, when I first had my boys, it was like, I must breastfeed. I cannot give them formula. And then I'm going to do all like organic and healthy food. And then like suddenly they're eating like goldfish from the bottom of their car seat. You know what I mean? Like, and you're like, how did we get here? I never thought I would do this. And it's so funny because all of my like, when I look around at like my friend circle, we're all like very health and fitness minded. We're all kind of from that same era. We're like, can you believe how our kids are eating right now? Like, holy crap. Like, and it's not, obviously we like big rocks of try to like give them nutrient dense food. But at the same time, like they're gonna have exposure to food that just isn't healthy, that has stuff in it that maybe we don't love. But again, when you look at the sum of all of the things, like that's where you have to put your focus and effort. Is your kid active? Is your kid getting exposure to healthy food? And it doesn't have to be every single night for dinner. Like there's so many nights where, full disclaimer, we get home really late and I'm like, okay, like we're just going to heat up some like
chicken nuggets,
chicken nuggets, some meatballs. And like, we're just going to like crush that and get some food, you active, crazy little boys, and then get to bed. And it's okay that not every meal is super structured and super healthy, even coming from a background of wanting to, again, do right by your kid, give them a healthy life. But so much of giving them a healthy life is creating balance and not so much dogma attached to their food choices as a young kid. And now that my kids have other kids over, I can see where like, I know exactly what you're being told at home. I know exactly what you're being told. And for better or for worse, it's hard to see sometimes.
I can even tell, like I have a 3-year-old who's in preschool and I can even tell when like a teacher says something about her food or like her packed lunch or her snacks, because she'll come home and say something to me like, Mom, sugar is bad for you. We're not supposed to have sugar. And I'm like, I don't use that language in my house. So that came from school. And then we sit there and we have a conversation about sugar and what it does for our body and why we need it, but also we don't want to have too much of it and we might get a bellyache. And I'm speaking about it in 3-year-old language, not the same way I'd speak to an adult about it. But I think that, to your point, what we are doing and what our children are doing most of the time is what's going to have the biggest impact. There's going to be exposures to food dyes or to things that we don't always want them to have, or to extra screen time given the circumstances. But is that what we're doing most of the time? And I know, just to mention one other thing about the food dye conversation and moms specifically, anytime I've posted about this, I get the like, well, I'm a teacher and I see it in my classroom that all these kids are hyperactive and all of these kids have ADHD. And in my head, I can't help but also feel like, well, how much screen time has that kid had? How much recess has that kid had? Has that kid had phys ed today? Like, have they had a chance to get any outside activity or play, physical play? Or have they been trying to sit in a desk all day and they're struggling to do that because they have energy that they need to get out? Maybe they didn't have phys ed. Maybe they didn't have outside recess because it's too cold. And maybe then they go home and they watch 4 hours of TV time until dinner. Like, is it the food dyes, or is it possible that there are other things contributing?
Oh, 100%. And I have that kid. I have my son, Cade, he's in 5th grade. And from the beginning of time, him going to preschool, it's always been like, he just has a lot of energy. He cannot sit still. And I can tell you, it's not because I'm feeding him a bunch of crap. And it's not because he does not exercise or has screen time. He is just wired to move. And I would argue that all kids are wired to move and they need the opportunity to move. They need that outlet. They need that reset. And their attention span in general is not made for a typical school structure. And so it's like, these kids aren't fitting into the system, which this is a whole other conversation. And my kids are in public school, but I look at that and I just tell the teacher, I'm like, when he is acting out, when he is trying to just be funny or get whatever, or just like not listening or whatever, tell him to go take a lap, like literally make him run, go like run an errand for you, just take a lap, go run outside and then come back and reset. I have had to do that with him since he was 2 years old. Like I'm telling you, he can't sit still for that long. And so again, it's not always that they're being fed all this crap. Yes. And sometimes, yes. And you'll see that manifest in so many other ways too. See that in a lot of other ways.
And that's why it's like, you can't blame one thing.
Right.
And even if you look at the research on the food dye stuff, it's so interesting. Like when all this started to get a little bit more popular, I'm like, all right, let me sit down and firsthand dive into some of this research. And this is such a great example that I like to give. There was a study back in like 2007. They looked at 3-year-olds and 8-year-olds. And then they had parents and teachers assess if the kids seemed more hyperactive after they gave them a drink.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know what 8-year-olds act like. I know what 3-year-olds act like. They're so volatile. Like you're going to tell that was your test, like that was the study. And not to mention, they gave a drink that had like 4 different dyes or ingredients in it. So first of all, how do you even know which thing did it? Right. Because that's a terrible, like it just a terrible even study, like whatever conducted that study, the methods were not great. And so, a lot of people like to bring up this ADHD piece of it. And well, research says this. And I'm like, well, they gave them one drink. They used 4 food additives. And then they gave a placebo and they said, okay, well, it looks like the 3-year-old's hyperactivity increased with the drink, with one of the drinks. Okay. My 3-year-old, if she could drink water and her activity would increase if she was dehydrated. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I think that we get very, very quick to put blame on something, especially if we could do something other than blame ourselves as moms.
Right.
So it's like, owning that my kid watches 5 hours of TV, or we don't go to the park, or we don't exercise, or we don't move. I don't want to have to own any of that potentially. Right. But if I could put the blame on something else, food dyes, they're poisoning us.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have been able to kind of outsource that blame and make someone else take responsibility. And I'm not sitting here trying to like shame parents at all about if your kid has ADHD, it's all your fault. Like that is not what I want to make that clear. I'm not here to shame parents. My point is nuance and context matter, and the big rocks matter. Movement, sleep, nutrition, what we're feeding our kids, how much our kids are moving, how much social interaction they're getting. All of those are big rocks. How much sleep our kids are getting. Those are big, big rocks.
And we have to teach and instill those big rocks. And what I see is it is so attached to how the family operates, how the parents operate. If they're like hyper focused on maybe some of the little rocks themselves, then that's what's going to be passed on to the kid. And like you said, and then after school, it's like, well, what do you guys do after school? Well, we just kind of come home and we hang out. I'm like, man, let me tell you, like, again, my kids are a little bit older.
They're in sports.
It is absolutely critical for my kids to have something after school pretty much every single day. It is critical for how they operate, how they think, and their energy. And I'm not saying that has to be 5 days a week, but I'm saying between 3 and 4 days a week after school. I cannot imagine a world of them coming home and just sitting around. Like, what the hell are we doing? Absolutely not. They have been in school all day. They need to get out and express themselves in other ways, be in different environments, be outside, be playing, be doing a sport, be learning a new physical task. Like, that is absolutely critical to their entire development. And I feel like that is something that is critically missing. And I'm seeing that now from the scope of being like a coach, but now so immersed in the mom space.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Even with my 3-year-old, there was a day I went to go pick her up. This was a few weeks ago. And her teacher was like, she kind of had a hard time today. And she said, and it wasn't just her, it was a lot of the class. She said, but she was getting really frustrated easily. She was just kind of temperamental today. She really had a hard time. Okay, good to know. I said, did you guys happen to go outside today? She said, no, it was too cold. So we got in the car and I said, Sloan, why do you think you had such a hard time today? And she said, Mommy, I just wanted to move my body. And I was like, first of all, love that she is 3 and can vocalize that. Like, how freaking cool. 2, how cool is that she was able to have the awareness to recognize, like, I feel better when I can move my body. And I had so much stuck in me that I just couldn't get out. And so the next day I went into the teacher. I'm like, look, I know that there's rules about, like, if it's under a certain amount of degrees, they can't go outside, but like, you guys have a whole gym. There's a rock wall in that gym. Like, can you go into the gym? And so they have been doing that more, luckily. But, we're the same. Like, our kids, when Sloan comes home from school, we head to the local park. Like we go to the park almost every day, assuming it's not like 10 degrees out. And if it is 10 degrees out, we actually just this winter got a jungle gym kind of thing that we put in our basement, and there's like ladders on it and there's a slide on it and there's like a little rock wall portion of it. And we just go downstairs and they climb over and over and over. Like I got to pry them off of that thing to even get, like, they're just so happy to move their bodies. Like kids want to move, they want to explore, and it's good for them. Like they sleep better, their behavior is better, they eat better. So yeah.
And I think this is, and we say all of this, obviously not from a place of like dogma or must be nice, but from a place of like, again, if we're so concerned and what we're hearing in the media and all around us and in our different mom groups, which mom groups are the most sanctimonious source of information. It is not a good place to get your info. I don't care how well-meaning they are. Your fellow mom circle is not the person and people you turn to for advice on some of these big rocks. But if we're so hyper-focused on some of these little details that we're missing the forest through the trees, in terms of like, we're obsessed about the Tupperware that we're using with our kids, but we're not also encouraging them to be in a sport and moving outside and having like protein for whatever, like we're missing it. And it's just an invitation to zoom out a little bit and like reassess what we're giving so much energy and anxiety to.
Yeah. So you mentioned that your kids they're always pretty much doing something after school. Is that all organized sport, or are there other things activity-wise that they do outside of organized sport? And I'm asking from a place of being completely naive because I have babies and I don't know what bigger kids do.
Yeah. And I'll say this with the
preface.
Yeah, the preface. Thank you. My brain was not working. I have two very active sport loving children. And maybe my approach would be slightly different if they weren't, but I do believe that there is a sport or physical hobby for every single child. It is your responsibility as a parent to help them find that. So that is my like preface to this. But my boys are very athletic. They are very motivated by sports. They love it. And so they play a sport every single season. We start with like flag football or football, and we merge into basketball season. And then from there into baseball. And then they do jujitsu year round. But then the volume and intensity of that just looks different at different points in time. With jujitsu, that's very much for us in our family anyway, a life skill versus a sport. It's something that you got to know how to do in general for your mental, physical, emotional development and self-defense. But all the other sports, it's good because they're around teammates, they're around different coaches. It helps reinforce so much of the parenting that I try to do, that sports just teach so much more beautifully and organically than me just telling them. And if there's a night where they don't have a practice, ultimately they're playing outside. Luckily, we live where there's a ton of kids around and they do that. But guess what? Like we've instilled this culture of like, they go outside and they play basketball. They go to the park and they play football with their friends. And it's been so nice to see that that's just part of the culture that we've established. Or furthermore, like they watch my husband and I train, like we both do jujitsu. And so it's not uncommon for them to come to a practice and see their parents doing practice. Yeah, so I always say like, if I'm not at your practice, you're at my practice. So, because again, it's so important to occupy their brains and their bodies after they've been in such a structured environment all day. They need to go into a different environment, even if sports are still structured. Yes, play and just have that exposure to that physical outlet, the change in energy, the change in dynamics of people that they're around. And I feel like that's been really critical to just seeing like their development. Because if they have a problem at school that day with a friend, well, if they're going to baseball, they're going to be around new friends, and it like gets them out of that funk. And I'm just sort of anticipating what's to come as they get older. And that's like, God, it's going to be such a crutch to have that kind of physical outlet after school.
It's funny. I was just listening to this podcast. What is his name? Jonathan something. He wrote the Anxious Generation book. He was on Dr. Becky's podcast. If you've heard of Dr. Becky, like the parenting expert lady, I catch a few of her podcasts here and there. And he is a psychologist that has done a lot of research in kids and why kids are so anxious these days and why their parents are so anxious these days. And it was such an interesting conversation about how much since, we've always heard like, oh, now that there's more technology, we're moving less. But he really dove into like when that change happened, why it happened, and how like kids have phones now. Like they're on smartphones from a young age, or they're on tablets from a young age. And it's not that the tablet itself or the phone itself is always inherently harmful. It's that what the kid would be doing if they weren't on that. They'd be outside, or they'd be with friends, or they'd be in sport, or they'd be socializing in person, or they'd be riding a bike outside, or they'd be playing hide and seek. Or like when I was a teenager, we were playing manhunt with all the other teenagers in my neighborhood.
Yep.
And so that was really, really interesting for me to hear, like, oh, it's not just the screen time. It's what the screen time is taking away from in terms of childhood experiences and social interactions and taking risks. Like just what kids are exposed to is so much different now. And as parents, we're more anxious about letting them do unsafe things. And I heard a while ago, like, you have to let your kids do unsafe things safely, like just supervise it, like, but let them do unsafe things. And it really changed my perspective on just how I handled my girls, even like at the local park. My 3-year-old would be like, Mommy, I want to climb this. And I'd be like, no, honey, that's for the bigger kids. You're too little for that. I don't want you to get hurt. Can I just try? So one day I let her try. She did this one of those ladders that, I don't know, it's hard to describe, but it's this crazy looking ladder that's not a just straight up and down ladder. And she did the whole thing. And she's like, Mommy, I did it. I was like, oh my gosh, you did that. You're so strong. Wow, you were so brave. And now she's like, Mom, I'm strong. I'm brave. I could do it. And I see even the way that she talks to herself and affirms herself, because I'm no longer anxious about her doing something. So it's interesting how like our own anxiousness can even bleed into our children. And then that dictates the risks that your children are willing to take. And I used to all the time be like, be careful, be careful, be careful. And now I've really tried to stop like be carefuling, because I'm like, I don't want to. I noticed it when she would start telling her younger sister, she's 22 months, she'd start saying to the little one, be careful, Reese, be careful, Reese. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm making her anxious. And now Reese is making her like, I was like, oh my God, I got to drop the be carefuls. And so now if she's climbing something, I say something like, trust your body, or pay attention to where your hands and your feet are, or you're brave. I know you could do this. Your legs are really strong. I know you could climb this. And instilling that. And then she gets to the top and she's like so proud of herself. Like she's like, I don't even need you to be proud of my mom. Like she's so proud of herself. And it's been really cool to see that shift, but it's very interesting how as a parent, you see it bleed into your kids.
You do. And you just see like there's so many different ways we can empower our kids, and like movement and these big rocks are the ways that we can empower them instead of creating fear and anxiety around food or around their bodies when they move. And like when like, oh my God, are you okay? And I see that with like my 7-year-old, like it is so different because he has been raised with his older brother and all of his older brother's friends. So he is the most durable 7-year-old.
He's got more exposure. Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, that kid, he had like a football thrown at his face at like 2 days old, So like he had to be very durable from the get-go. But it's interesting seeing him interact with like other kids. Say if he's on a basketball team, like the kids are like crying when they fall, or this happens, or that's not fair. And like Chance is like,
he's got a little more grit to him.
And like grit is instilled and it's reinforced. And I think, again, whether that is having to do that with yourself and who you surround yourself with and the information you take in as a mom, as an athlete, as a coach, or what you're there for then instilling into your kid, like we have a lot of opportunities there to teach that and to practice that.
Yeah. I think parents are in a unique position in this day and age because our kind of like millennial generation has been a generation of like people that have been in therapy and people who are trying to like work through their own traumas and things like that. And I love that for our generation in terms of wanting to better your mental and emotional health. And I've had this conversation before, even with my own therapist, of trying to find the balance between I want to raise strong, resilient, gritty kids. And I also want them to feel heard. And I also want them to feel that they could trust me and they could come to me and tell me something. And I never want to tell them, don't cry or don't show. I want them to be able to show their emotions. And I also want them to be gritty and know that they could do hard things. And I think it's probably I don't want to say the first time ever, but I would say it's something that our generation specifically is so hyper focused on, like wanting to find that balance between grit and grace.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think this makes such a case for if you're trying to like raise those healthy, resilient kids, which I think all of us would love to think that that's exactly what we're trying to do, focusing on those big rocks of like activity and exposure, but then also following up with the ability to have a conversation so that your kids learn how to have a conversation at a young age. A lot of people from our generation maybe weren't taught how to communicate as well, or told that we couldn't say this or say that or have that kind of conversation and that dynamic with your parent. And it's been, now that again, Cade is a little bit older, he's 11. I am so impressed by the conversations he's able to have and how like emotionally intelligent he is, while at the very same time being an extremely active, spirited, stubborn, crazy boy, like very crazy boy. And then at the same time, he can tap into his emotions. And I'm like, okay, like I think we're kind of figuring this out.
I think I'm doing okay.
And it's obviously an imperfect situation, but you do start to see doses of their personality and what you've tried to instill in little opportunities over time start to add up. And I have no idea what the future will hold.
Yeah. It's cool when you see them express it too. Sloan could do something like, how did you do that? She'll just say to me, Mommy, I can do hard things. And I'm like, I know where that came from. It came from me telling her, like, she would get frustrated with something. And I tell her, you can do hard things. Try again. It's okay if you're getting frustrated. Let's take a deep breath, but now try again. She can sit there and have those tools and those tactics of I could do hard things. And also she could see her sister crying and say, Reese, do you want to take a deep breath with me? And you're just like, as a parent, you're like, oh, okay, I'm doing something right. Yeah.
Yeah, they're hearing it. They're hearing it.
Yeah.
And I think that is so much of it is just like the example. One thing I always try to tell people, and that I didn't realize at first with my business, but it was like, you have like, you're a female athlete and you have that identity. And then you become a pregnant athlete, and that's a very temporary identity. And then you're a postpartum athlete. That's also a very temporary season. But then you move into being an athlete mom. And as a mom, ultimately, you are the coach of your family.
Yep.
And so it's like that athlete mom role goes into becoming this coach and then raising, whether they're athletes or they're active kids or whatever it might be. Either way, you're raising this next generation of kids that you want to go out there and be the healthiest versions of themselves mentally, physically, and emotionally. So it's like so much of our life trajectory as a female athlete is really setting us up to support our kids in their life trajectory as an athlete. And so I'm going to preface this next thing by saying that, because I think we do as moms get so tempted, and even as athletes, to kind of hold on or try to get back, similar to what we were talking about earlier. And we get tempted by a lot of the messaging on social media from a certain diet that they should be doing, or if this is the only kind of exercise routine you should be doing if you are this age or whatever. Or even now, some of the conversations around like a GLP-1 and saying, well, I want to be healthy. Is that the thing that's going to be healthy and right and best for me? Like, not necessarily a quick fix, but it seems like a shiny solution to a lot of people when we are, again, kind of navigating this, like, how do I want to show up? Well, I want to be healthier for my kid. I want to be healthier in my family. Should I do this exercise? Should I do this diet? Should I do this GLP-1? Like, what should I do? And I would love to just kind of hear your opinion on that mix of elements of things.
Yeah. So GLP-1s are definitely a loaded topic.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, like most things, at least my stance, and I know yours too, is nuance and context matters.
Yeah.
I do not think, that a 21-year-old or a 19-year-old who wants to lose 10 pounds for spring break should go on a GLP-1. That's absurd.
Right.
I like to say, like, if it's strictly for vanity and not for health, like, we need to reconsider.
Yeah.
We need to reconsider that. In specific populations, we know that GLP-1s can be really, really helpful. Now, mainly what happens when someone is taking a GLP-1 is there's a massive, massive reduction in appetite and food noise. If you've ever been in pretty restrictive dieting phase, food noise kind of gets a little louder. Like, you're always kind of thinking about your next meal, or you're constantly thinking about snacking or what you're going to be eating next. For me, that I had very, very intense food noise in kind of the thick of my eating disorder. I was always thinking about food.
Yeah.
And so the reduction in food noise and the reduction in appetite, because there's a delaying in gastric emptying, food sitting in the stomach longer. And so people, by being on a GLP-1, end up putting themselves in a caloric deficit. And that's something that I think is very important for people to hear, because I think some people just perceive that, you take this injection and it makes you lose weight. And I think it's helpful to understand that the mechanism by which it works is still you being in a caloric deficit. If you took a GLP-1 and you still were eating in a surplus somehow, which would be very, very difficult because the appetite reduction is pretty intense, you wouldn't lose weight if you were still in that surplus. And so one, I think it's important for people to hear that the deficit is what is causing the fat loss.
Right. Which is still the big rock.
Yes.
It's just a different strategy, but still the big rock.
You can't escape the calories in, calories out. Like you can't escape the energy balance component of fat loss.
Right.
Where I am very cautious about the prescription of GLP-1s, a few things. One is muscle mass. It is so crucial, whether you are on a GLP-1 or not. When you are in a deficit, you are more at risk of muscle loss. And muscle loss is one of the worst, really, health things that could happen to us, because muscle is so protective and having lean mass is so protective for our health, that losing muscle, not just from a metabolic standpoint, but from like a cardiovascular standpoint and a respiratory standpoint and injury risk standpoint and all-cause mortality standpoint, like muscle is really, really important. It's a very, very, very protective organ. And so when we put ourselves in a very steep deficit, which is typically what's happening with the GLP-1, we're even more at risk for muscle loss.
Yeah.
And there's kind of two components of that. One is very low calories, of course, can make for more atrophy. And the other piece is that if previously you were exercising because it was allegedly going to help you lose weight, and now you're taking a GLP-1 and you're like, I don't even need to exercise anymore, or I don't have the energy to exercise anymore because my calories are so low, you're at even more risk of losing muscle. And so to me, it is crucial, absolutely crucial, that you are strength training if you are on a GLP-1. Really, if you're in a deficit at all, but especially with a GLP-1, because calories are so low and because the deficit is pretty steep, it would be a non-negotiable for me. Like you would have to be strength training.
Right. Absolutely. And I'm starting to hear more use of it in the athlete community, especially in weight cut sports. Again, I'm in like the jiu-jitsu world. And I'm wondering if you have input on, on the performance ramifications of that. Common sense, but tell me, if you're not fueled appropriately for your activity, you might see some repercussions. But at the same time, like it also helps with like insulin and all of that stuff. And
yeah,
and it's just, I think there's, again, a lot of nuance here, but it's just kind of bridging that.
That's very interesting. That's the first I'm hearing of really like athletic populations wanting to use it. I didn't think about that like for weight cuts. That's very, very interesting. In weight related sports where there's a weight class and you might need to cut down to a certain weight.
Mm-hmm.
I understand logically where that thought comes from. I would agree, if the deficit is so vast, not only are you putting your actual muscle and strength at risk and your endurance at risk, but yeah, how could you perform well on 800 to 1,000 calories? I mean, that's what most people are averaging on these drugs, between 800 and 1,000 calories mostly. That is
really low.
Very low. That is a very, very steep deficit. And especially if I think about like 200-pound male,
right?
That's low. For 120-pound female, that would still be low. But I think about, an athlete who needs more nutrients and more calories to perform well and recover well. I don't think there's been any research on it, but I don't think you need research to tell you like it's probably like kind of contraindicated. And I think the other thing that comes up is, especially with the muscle side of things, not only is your deficit so steep, and then you are more at risk for muscle loss. The other piece of it is if you can only fit in your stomach 800 calories a day, call it, maybe even 1,000 calories per day, how much of that is coming from protein? How much of that is coming from fruits and vegetables? Especially if the mindset of the person taking it is, now that I'm on a GLP-1, I don't have to work out and I can eat whatever I want. Now, I know that that's not everyone's mindset when they're on it, but there are a lot of people who that probably is. You know, I've even heard of doctors saying to patients, like, you take this, you won't even have to work out. Eat what you want, eat what you could fit in. And so now we're talking about people being at risk for a nutrient deficiency, even because we're not able to even fit in the food or have the appetite for the food that we would otherwise be consuming. So I think that, again, I'm not anti-GLP-1s. Someone very close to me who really, really, really struggled with weight loss for a very, very long time has been on a GLP-1 for probably over a year now. And it was life-changing for her. She had felt like she tried everything under the sun to lose weight and had even done very low calorie diets and wasn't really feeling the effects of that. And struggled with a lot of food noise. And this person was already walking 10,000 steps a day, doing cardio multiple times a week, strength training 4 times a week. Like, she was a great candidate for it. And it was life-changing for her. And she still continues to focus on protein and nutrient density and strength training and cardio. And she's doing all the right things while she's on it. And so my point is, if you're going to go on it, you have to focus on strength training. You have to still move your body. You have to still prioritize protein and nutrient density and color in your diet. And so I think that there's I don't want to say a right and wrong way, but there's a better and worse way to go about it.
Yeah. And I think it all comes back to, like, the overall theme of this podcast episode is focusing on the big rocks and then use the little rocks to sort of supplement aspects of what you're already doing. For some, that might be a GLP-1. For some, that might be reducing some of the dyes in their food. Fine, but make sure you're focusing on the big rocks of physical activity, lifting weights, cardiovascular health, well-rounded nutrition, and just trying to improve the quality of your life mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all those things. That's what's going to move the dial for most people and ultimately most families. Seeing that exemplified by you, whoever's listening to this, that's going to be one of the biggest drivers for sustainable health practices and belief systems that we're putting into our kids.
One of the other big rocks, I'll just add this because I think sometimes this one gets forgotten about. You know, we talk so much about movement and protein and sleep and stress management, but this one especially, because I think this is another like mom vulnerable thing, is alcohol. And until I became a mom, I didn't realize how much of like the mommy wine culture was a thing. And that became like this token strategy of how moms are supposed to cope with motherhood or with their day. And we have normalized alcohol to that degree, especially in motherhood. In the last few months, the Surgeon General, you know, there was this new Surgeon General's warning now about alcohol, and alcohol may cause cancer. And there were all these polls and stuff done. And it was something like 60% of people didn't know that alcohol was bad for them. And that was mind-boggling to me, that people genuinely didn't know that alcohol has harmful effects and that there are 7 alcohol-related, alcohol-induced cancers. And that was very, very eye-opening for me to see those stats, because I was like, wow, the health industry, the fitness industry needs to do a better job of talking about this if people are still thinking that alcohol doesn't come with consequences. Like, alcohol is one of those big, big rocks. If you are consuming alcohol in the regular and you are worried about seed oils and food dyes, like, we are missing the forest for the trees big, big, big time.
Yep. Oh, I couldn't agree more. And again, it doesn't have to be this all or nothing, but it's acknowledging that this is a critical piece of your health practices and where you're focusing a lot of your energy, a lot of your efforts, and not overlooking that piece of it. I'm really glad that you brought that part up, because you're right. Very much infiltrates the mom circle including a lot of female athletes, and how people, like to spend their social time, but you can socialize without alcohol. Might not always be popular, and it doesn't have to be every single time, but there's a way of working around that. Well, we've been yapping for a little while here, and I feel like we could just keep doing like a part 2 and part 3 because there's so many rabbit holes we could go down. But I'm so grateful for your time spent with us today, having these conversations, and honestly, like really candid conversations, which I feel like there just needs to be more of because it is messy out there online, and you've been in the game for a long time as well. We've kind of seen all those pendulum swings, a lot of the extreme messaging, and just trying to figure out how to navigate it as a coach, as an athlete, and as a mom. And I think you do a great job of that. Very grateful for you. And can you tell us where we can learn a little bit more about you and your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am mainly on Instagram. I'm not cool enough for TikTok, but you could find me at Joelle Samantha. My coaching company is Levolution Coaching. It's LVLTN. So levolutioncoaching.com, or you could just find me on Instagram. And if you did listen in, I'd love to hear from you. So let me know if you listened, if you enjoyed it, or if you hated it, just let me know.
I think it went great. I'm really appreciative. Thanks for sharing your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Practice Brave podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review and help us spread the work we are doing to improve the overall information and messaging in the fitness industry and beyond. Now, if you are pregnant and you are looking for a trustworthy exercise program to follow, I have you covered. The Pregnant Athlete Training Program is a well-rounded program for pregnancy with workouts for each week that are appropriate for your changing body. That's 36 weeks of workouts, 3 to 4 workouts each week, and tons of guidance on exercise strategy. We also have an at-home version of that program. If you are postpartum and you're looking for an exercise program to follow, the 8-week Postpartum Athlete Training Program would be a really great way to help bridge the gap between rehab and the fitness you actually want to do. From there, we have the Practice Brave Fitness Program, which is an ongoing strength and conditioning program where you get new workouts each week and have a lot of guidance from myself and my co-coach, Heather Osby. This is the only way that I'm really offering ongoing coaching at this point in time. If you have ever considered becoming a certified pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach, I would love to have you join us. Pregnancy and Postpartum Athleticism is a self-paced online certification course that will up-level your coaching skills and help connect the dots between pelvic health and long-term athletic performance, especially during pregnancy and postpartum. Become who you needed and become who your online and local community needs by becoming a certified pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach. Thank you again for listening to the Practice Brave podcast. I appreciate you, and please help me continue spreading this messaging, this information, and this work.